When it comes to big projects in music productions, there's a few things that you can do to make it more manageable. And today I specifically want to talk about how to handle big projects in the mixing stage. Because as you can see, some of the projects for my album are pretty big. As you can see, 270 tracks. I mean, I've seen the Jacob Collier live stream where he had over 1,000 tracks, but at least for me, that is pretty massive, 270. And as you can see, what is happening in the mixing stage is that it's all being collapsed into individual groups. And you might say like, okay, that's true, but that is really easy to like implement and to understand. But there is some deeper detail in here going on than you might think. When it comes to grouping stuff, I've really thought about and tried different setups with different categories of groups. So for example, I used to only have 6 groups instead of 7, where the sequences and one-shot groups was combined. But if we look at these kind of groups now and how big they are with the amount of elements that are in the one-shots as well as in the sequences, that would result in one massive group, which would make it much, much harder to actually find elements. So thinking about just the categories of sounds that you're going to find in your mixdown and dividing up the sounds is crucial so that it's easier to find the individual sound that you're looking for. And one of the big things, therefore, is that you don't want any one of the groups to be too big. One really funny example of that is what I've seen in the dubstep scene from time to time, where they have a sidechain group and that just contains basically the whole song except the kick and the snare. And to be honest, personally for me, just having one group that contains everything would be basically unworkable for me, because I really like some very clear organization in my projects. And that is also where the color comes in. As you can see, I have chosen very bright, flashy colors for most of the groups. And sometimes it is funny that I open up the camera and I do this and my whole face becomes green. It used to be a little bit more back before I had the studio lights, but it actually also serves a very strong function. And that is again to just be able to see at a glance where I'm at in the project. Now, as you can imagine, this is all part of just being consistent, and consistency is very, very crucial when you're doing something creative, so that you have not so much a boundary, but you have like a template that you can work from, just so that you know where everything is in the project and just so that you don't have to worry about the structure of the project and worry about anything that you're doing. A good analogy that I can give is imagine being a painter, but the dimensions of your canvas are constantly changing, like the height and the width and all of that. You cannot really get into your creative flow at that point because of course, you don't know where the painting is going to end up. So as you can imagine, it's all just a very confusing situation, not really the situation to get creative in. And therefore, for me, the consistency is so important that this is basically just a mirror copy of the template that I have inside of Ableton, which, as you can see over here, uses a very, very similar color scheme. I try to match it as closely as possible. Of course, in here, I also want it to be a little bit, maybe a little bit more saturated, a little bit more contrasted. Because in Ableton, you can just choose from a bunch of default colors, and here I could just say whatever color I wanted. But as you can see, the colors are consistent, and also the groups that I'm using, and also the way that I'm ordering the groups, it is all exactly the same in both of the projects, both the production project and the mixing project. And that means that for me, it's also very easy to export all of the stems, because I just export each group individually, as in I start rendering out all of the individual files in the drums group, and I give them the prefix drum dash and then the name of the track. That way, when I'm re-importing them into Reaper, as you can imagine, it just takes maybe 2 minutes to organize the project again and just have everything back in here. That doesn't mean that I'm gonna have all of the groups like I have it now. Of course, during the mixing process, I also make new groups and new tracks. But just being able to quickly go from the production being rendered out into the mixing process means that I don't have to spend a lot of time actually setting things up. Like, as you can imagine, I want to be able to dive into it immediately. And that is also why in my mixing template, if I open up, for example, the mixer here, my template comes preloaded with some of the analyzers that I want to use. But it also comes already with all of the routing from all of the individual groups going into a mix bus. Now, something that I've been doing recently and that I'm actually going to implement into my template starting from after the album is going to be this mix bus minus drum and bass group over here, which is essentially going to do the same thing that I talked about before with that dubstep production way where they have one massive sidechain group. What I'm essentially going to do is I'm going to combine these 4 groups, or actually these 5 groups over here, from sequences up to vocals, and all of them are going to go into this group, so mainly that they can be sidechained. So this is my sidechain compression on there. I'm doing also a little bit more processing in the form of a little bit of glue compression here, I see. And I see an EQ which isn't actually doing anything. That might actually be there just to look for maybe lower frequencies in that group or something like that. The next part of organization is going to be dBdone. I'm going to make a separate video on how I've started using dBdone. As you can see, all of the projects are imported over here. And one of the things that you'll notice is that I really like using this set over here, this stages over here. I believe you go somewhere in the settings, if I'm not mistaken. Over here, you can set up your project phases and you can really just customize this to however you want. Now, as you can imagine, this is a really handy way to organize all of your projects. And what this has really done is replacing a lot of text documents for me. Because before this, I used to be the kind of person that just has text documents for everything. I still kind of am, as you can see. I have a text document over here for all of the topics that I want to go over for this March Mixing Madness. I've shown before this list, of course, of the massive list of revisions that I actually need to do to the mixes. But also a little behind the scenes here, I have scripts for my shorts and for where I get the intros from and all of that kind of stuff. And as I said before, I also had text documents for the album. Now, if you want to try out dBdone for yourself, you can do so for free on their website. There's going to be a link in the description. And if you choose to upgrade to a paid plan, then make sure that you use my demo code so that I get a little kickback from your purchase. The final thing that I want to talk about is a little bit of the deeper organization. For some of these groups, not even for all of them, but for some of these groups, what I'd like to do is going through it before starting the mixing stage, just setting up the priorities of the elements, in the sense that the kick is going to be the most important element in this group, so therefore it's going to be on top. And the second most important stuff is going to be the top drums. Then, of course, we're going to go down, and then we get into less and less important elements for the overall picture of the mix. I mean, of course, they're still all important elements, and they still need to be added and be treated with respect. But they're not like a main element like a kick drum is. And I do the same thing specifically with my sequences. And the reason why I only really do it with the sequences and not, for example, the one-shots is that the one-shots I see like more all at kind of the same level. And they're not really layered on top of each other. They're layered more in different spots in time, to say it like that. Like if I scroll through it, you can see that it's basically everywhere there's playing different one-shots and they're not all playing at the same time. Whereas if I go into the sequences, that is sometimes the case where you can see we either have groups where they're made out of multiple layers, or we just have many, many different elements playing in the same spot, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different elements playing over here that are all layering on top of each other and that are all stacked on top of each other. What I personally like to do is at the very start of the mixing project already kind of have in my head, okay, which of these elements are going to be the main upfront elements and which of these elements are going to be more the background elements that are going to be supporting the main elements but not overpower them. So as you can see, we're already doing a lot to organize the project, but that's not the whole story of the actual mixing session, because of course also your tools and all of the other things that you're using within the project need to be organized. One of the things that needs to be organized is automations, which I really like how they're being done inside of Reaper, as they're just like a small track under the actual track that they apply to. I know there's some DAWs where you can have the automation separate from the actual element that it applies to, mainly in FL Studio that is the case. And the reason why I bring this up is because one of my biggest frustrations coming from FL Studio, like back in the days, for me was not being able to link all of those things together. If I wanted to move an element, I had to either select a whole bunch of different automations, which back in the day, back when I wasn't really good at organizing projects, were just randomly dotted throughout the project. Or I would need to write them in special ways using, for example, MIDI clips and MIDI patterns and whatnot, and the old automation system that was there before the clip automation system was. So just the feature set of a DAW is very, very important in realizing how you can organize your project. And one of the other things that you can do, for example, in many DAWs is set up, as you can see over here, some favorite plugins. This way I don't have to always go look for them or type them out. I still often do. It's just kind of like a habit, just quickly typing out the plugin that you're using, but just having the main ones that you're most likely going to use in a list like this means, of course, that it takes a lot less time actually finding the plugins that you want to work with. So that's really all about everything that I do in terms of project organization. I thought going more into, say, Reaper settings and individual things that I may have changed over time would be interesting, but to be honest, for the amount of settings that there are and all of the defaults, trying to remember all of the defaults, what they were, and seeing what all of the settings were that I actually changed, it's going to be a real hassle. And as you can imagine, I've been using Reaper for, say, 3 years now. I don't remember all of the settings that I've changed. I don't remember what all of the defaults were. And Reaper is quite a big software that has a lot of different options. In fact, that favorite things that I just showed at the end is not something that I discovered until I started mixing this album. So that is why I still have the habit of just writing in the plugin names. But I already noticed now, having set up the favorite system, it is so much faster just working with that if I stick to using just that and then don't let the old habits take over again. It is kind of the same as this menu over here that I've been using for a few years now as well. This is just so much faster that over time it's going to take over, but you just need to set it up. You need to make sure that everything is in there that you want to use, because otherwise you're going to find yourself going back to, I don't know, your plugin list for the certain plugins that you still need to find, or maybe you have them over here in a separate folder or something like that. If your organization is a little bit all over the place, you're never really adapting the fastest part of the workflow. So therefore, I think talking about this stuff and making it a little bit of a longer video where I also cover some very small things that I've changed and some very small things that I'm doing differently is very, very important. And I hope that this helps you. Let me know if you did like it by liking the video, of course. And if you have some organizational tips, you can leave them down in the comments. Another way to support the channel is by watching some more of my content. So there will be 2 videos up on the screen where you can choose from. So just pick one and enjoy, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.